esteemed guests, Dr. Musa, Chairman, IRF, Dr. Azzam Tamimi, our guest speaker for tonight, Dr. Owi Ben, Executive Director of Penang Institute. Welcome to this public lecture event, jointly organized by IRF and Penang Institute on the evolution of Islamic political thought. The title itself implies that there has been an evolution or transformation among those political parties in the Muslim world subscribing to the Islamic political thought. Case in point, Ennahda in Tunisia has recently announced that they will embrace a party of Muslim Democrats rather than a party of Islamists. Such kind of bifurcation between Muslim Democrats and Islamists has recently occurred in Malaysia as well, as you know, emulating the example of Ghanouchi's Ennahda. So what does this evolution of approach amount to, if anything, and what are the implications and what are the prospects? Is this a historical transition, if so, as hailed by some, or it's just another rebranding game of labels and names? What is at stake for Islamic political thought in this so-called post-Islamism era? Who else to tackle these questions better than our guest speaker for tonight, Dr. Azzam Tamimi, a British Palestinian academician and political activist. He has been our guest for our events before, has been many times in programs in Malaysia. Currently is the director of the Institute for Islamic Political Thought in London and has authored several books on the subject matter. Actually, one of those books will be launched tomorrow afternoon, same venue. I think the title of the book is Rashid Ghanouchi, A Democrat Within Islamism. Its Bahasa version tomorrow will be launched here, so you may welcome, if keen and free to join. But before we pass the stage to our distinguished guest speaker, Dr. Azzam, I'd like to say a few words about Dr. Owi Ben, who will be presenting his welcoming speech tonight. Currently, Dr. Owi is the Executive Director for the Penang Institute. Prior to this, he was the Deputy Director of ICAS, Yusuf Ishak Institute in Singapore. Dr. Ben has been a long-term lecturer in Chinese political philosophy and Chinese history at Stockholm University. His latest books include The Euro-Asian Core and Its Edges, Dialogues with Wang Wonghu on the History of the World. It sounds already very interesting. So without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Ben for his welcoming speech. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm most honored to be here in this illustrious company. I drove down all the way from Penang only this afternoon just to listen to Dr. Azzam Tamimi, and I'll be driving up again after the talk. I have to say, we have a very long country. So thank you to my old friend, Musa, and to Islamic Renaissance Front for being willing to let Penang Institute help sponsor tonight's event. The Institute is most grateful for the opportunity. We are based in Penang, up north, as you know, and we have lately been investing a lot of resources into launching books and encouraging authors to interact with their potential readers. This is in keeping with our belief that Malaysia is in dire need, and let me repeat, dire need, of raising the intellectual level of our public discourses, and definitely the level of our political discourses. In fact, we recently launched a book prize to be awarded every year to a book of historical fiction that has Malaysia as the backdrop. So that's a note to all of you. If you want to write a book about Malaysia, then there's a chance for you to win a book prize from the Penang Institute. I'm very happy that the Institute is given a chance to support tonight's event and to host Dr. Tamimi. What better way to carry out dialogues and to sharpen our thinking than to have serious partners like the Islamic Renaissance Front. There are not that many serious such organizations in Malaysia today, as you might know. Now, one thing I've learned about religions, and it is this: a religion is more than the discourses that are used to define it. In fact, discourses are often meant to confine rather than to define a religion. And religions, once defined, easily become a tool of political power. Thus, there's an unavoidable dialectic in all religions between its spiritual values and its socio-economic or socio-political impact. And it is this exciting and painful relationship that the title of the talk tonight, The Evolution of Islamic Political Thought, tries to express, in the specific case of the Islamic tradition. This relationship is not an easy one to illustrate because not only is it a shifting one, it is a highly emotional one. Therefore, one has to look for the results manifested concretely in people's lives to know what the nature of a religious teaching or act really is. To call something merely Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or even atheist, or to consider something typically Chinese or Indian or Malay, is to always run the risk of being misunderstood or being consciously or unconsciously misleading. If nothing else, it diminishes humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, I remember a conversation I had many years ago with a famous professor from University Kebangsaan Malaysia, Professor Shamsul Amri Baharudin, an anthropologist. Many of you would have heard of him. He was a very young man then, as was I. I asked him a question that still puzzles many Southeast Asians today. The question is, how did it come about that Islam managed to spread so effectively in Southeast Asia to the extent that it, without the use of arms, subsumed all the earlier kingdoms in the Nusantara under it? His answer to me, and I hope I did not understand him here, was that Islam came as a liberator from power. A liberator from established power that has slowly but steadily suppressed common people for too long. But I'm sure that as Islam established itself and formed new relationships with power in the region, a struggle ensued between Islam as a liberating philosophy and Islam as the new clothes that all power could change it to. The notion of the evolution of political thought is of great interest to me because it expresses and embraces the constant struggle that must occur within the management of human affairs between power on one hand and its social and cultural effects on the other. Over time, paths are worked out which try to limit power and to stop it from being despotic and to instead steer it towards working for a common good. It is a difficult and an unending struggle, one that has to be fought anew by every generation. Ladies and gentlemen, when I was living and studying in Sweden as a young man, learning about the Swedish system of public management, I grew very interested in alternative traditions of social management. I thus began studying sinology, which basically is a hugely interdisciplinary. I wanted to learn what the tradition of Chinese political thought and philosophy is as an alternative tradition. Now, what I learned from Chinese studies is that there are no contradictions in reality. Contradictions exist only in the words we choose to use. You see what I mean in the word itself, contradiction. Contra on one side and diction on the other. A disagreement in the words used. Right? It is often through languages and discourses that we are separated, and mistakenly so, as if by essence. Otherwise, they are only forces acting upon each other, and words, arguments, debates are simply some of the forms those forces take. Now, in Chinese, the word for contradiction is maotun, which literally means spear and shield. Now, there's an interesting story behind this. there was once a street salesman, the story goes, who, when selling spears, would boast that his spears could pierce any material at all. Sorry to say, he also sold shields, which he claimed could not be pierced by any material either. So clearly, in making these claims, he created a contradiction, a mountain, through his carelessness and his overstretch of logic. I'm sure all of us are often too categorical with our words, and we create contradictions that we then do not care to correct. How often do we not do this as a society? Quite often, I think. And then by being more concerned and captivated with words than action, we go into conflict. And all because we created a careless contradiction that could have been avoided. And careless words then put into action lead to tension, and contradictions which don't exist in real life become real conflicts. Another thing I learned in studying different traditions is that we do rely a lot on analogies, metaphors, and associations when we think. We wax poetic without knowing it. And very often we do not know when to stop. We go too far, and we very often forget that we are merely being poetic, and we mistake a literary device for a logical claim. So again, what we need to do is look at the long-term results of our practices more than at the words used in order to judge what the good sides and what the bad sides of any of our practices actually are. So the struggle between the good and the bad sides of power goes on, and has always gone on in all parts of the world, in all traditions. And in each of these traditions, the nature of the struggles varies as well. These struggles are not a simple tug of war. Every battle changes the direction and the language of the war, and the search to steer human development in the right direction towards making power a liberating force and not a despotic one. That is how I would describe this epic conflict. Now, I know nothing about the Muslim tradition or the Arabic one, so I look very much forward to listening to Dr. Azzam Tamimi tonight and to learn from him. I think I've spoken too much, please excuse me. You are not here to listen to me, so let me hand the word back to Ms. Alma Barisa as we prepare to listen to the wise words of our honored guests of the night. Thank you again all for coming and for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Dr. Ben. There is no contradiction in reality. Something to take away with, and it could be easily quoted as a Quranic verse as well. It's exactly the same. The contradiction is in words we choose to use. Without further ado, I would like to welcome, and please join me to welcome Dr. Azzam Tamimi to the stage. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله ومن والاه. I'm truly honored to be here tonight. I'm most grateful for the invitation and the opportunities that have been given to me. I was thinking of talking to you about the story of Islamic political thought, how it actually evolved. But some of the points that have been raised so far in the past few minutes make me wonder whether we should start from the beginning or begin with where we stand today. For instance, the term political Islam or Muslim Democrats, what do they mean? How do they refer to each other? How do we identify ourselves when we talk to the other? Tomorrow we will witness the launch of the Malay translation of my book on Rashid Ghannouchi. And Rashid Ghannouchi is a person of great genius. I accompanied him for many years in the UK. I was almost his personal translator in many of the conferences, meetings he had during the years of his exile from 1991 until he returned to Tunisia in 2011. I also did my PhD taking his experience and his movement as a study case for the attitude of Islamists toward democracy and the main obstacles hindering the progress of democratization in the Middle East. Now, if I were to rewrite my book today, I'd probably say some very different things. Because what we've seen after the frustration of the Arab Spring has shown us that what at one stage we believe to be a fundamental principle is merely a tactical position. I mean, I know personally my own brothers with whom I lived for many years in the UK. I mean, it's no secret I am a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. I've always been a member of the Muslim Brotherhood and I'm proud of it. And I know that many of our brothers and sisters who find it difficult after the frustration of the Arab Spring tried to dissociate themselves from the Muslim Brotherhood were also with me in the Muslim Brotherhood organization. So you see, sometimes our thinking, our political thinking is molded by the circumstances we find ourselves in. And that's why we need really to be very careful. We shouldn't rush into final conclusions, whether about movements or individuals or even cases. And this is the story of Islamic political thought. It's the story of thousands of contributors to this body of knowledge that each of them was actually contributing on the basis of his or her understanding of the text and his or her own experience in life and with the implementation of whatever understanding they have of the text. Started with the very early days of Islam, when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ migrated from Mecca to Medina, and unlike the previous 13 years, he ended up heading a well-defined community. A community that now had a character, had geographic borders, and had an interest in first administering its own affairs and also defending its interests. One of the very first things he did in Medina was to author, to get written for him, the document of Medina, a constitution, one of the earliest known to humanity, that defines the roles and the responsibilities and the rights of the various components of this community, a community that had people who believed that this was the Prophet who came to them with a divine message, people who were from the people of the book, Jews and Christians, but mostly Jews, people who wanted to be part of the community but who were still paganists, mushrikeen. They did not embrace the new faith yet. So you see, it's quite diverse community, pluralistic in many ways. He needed to establish or to write down a constitution that organized their relations with each other. 10 years later, the Prophet passed away. And with his passage, with his death, revelation ended. We had the revelation in the form of the book, the Quran, but no more revelation were to come. And the Muslims from then on were left to themselves. They had to interpret the revelation they already had, they had to come up with solutions for new problems that they did not experience before. And if they had problems, they had to devise mechanisms to resolve them, because the Prophet was no longer there. When the Prophet was there, they'd rush to him if there was a dispute. Now he was no longer there. Of course, they have the book and they have his sunnah or his sayings or what they still remember of his actions, but he himself as an arbiter wasn't there anymore. Not only that, the very small community of Medina, which probably counted a few thousands, and which was to a large degree by the time the Prophet passed away, so homogeneous, very suddenly exploded into a superpower, into a huge entity, extending, by the time Abu Bakr became the first caliph, across the whole of Arabia, and by the time Umar became caliph, even extending into Persia, into North Africa, into parts of even sub-Saharan Africa. By the time Uthman became caliph, and we're talking here about what? A few years, a few dozens of years, the entire Mediterranean basin had become under their control. Now the real challenge here is how to govern, how to administer the affairs of such a rapidly growing community using the same model that fitted a very small community so homogeneous inside Medina. I can tell you on the basis of my own study that the Muslims were actually never able to resolve that problem or meet that challenge. And that led to considerable problems afterwards. Considerable problems. It was okay until around the middle era of Uthman, the third caliph. But then problems started. People didn't know what to do about it. Somebody came and killed the caliph. Of course, the previous caliph was killed, but wasn't killed by a Muslim. But this time, the third caliph was killed by Muslim rebels who felt that the system was no longer able to respond to their needs and solve their problems. That the justice that brought them into Islam was no longer being served. Remember that the entire political system in the early years of Islam was based around, or was established around, the verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تُؤَدُّوا الْأَمَانَاتِ إِلَى أَهْلِهَا وَإِذَا حَكَمْتُمْ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ أَن تَحْكُمُوا بِالْعَدْلِ. Allah commands you to give back to people what they own, what belongs to them. And when you judge or rule among people, you do that justly or fairly. The other verse, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى وَيَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنكَرِ وَالْبَغْيِ يَعِظُكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. Allah commands that you serve justice, that you do ihsan, and a lot can be said, can be explained about the word ihsan, that we don't have time today to, we can actually organize a conference about ihsan. Ihsan is the highest degree combining piety, compassion, and kindness together. This is what the Muslims are expected to do among themselves. But then they ended up not being able to monitor the officials who were deputizing for the caliph. They found themselves with so much wealth that they could not find means of preventing corruption. Slowly, Muslim community, the huge Muslim community, was getting away from the original model, which we can securely describe as the ideal model, the model of the Prophet and the rightly guided caliphs, to end up in a form of despotic monarchy. Starting with the Umayyads, followed by the Abbasids, followed by whatever dynasty that came afterwards. The only thing that served Islam and the Muslims was actually the stance of the scholars, the early stance of the scholars, who denied the rulers the right to monopoly of the text. So there was never a church in Islam. This is the greatest success that we have in Islam, that we never had a religious authority claiming to speak in the name of the Muslims or claiming to represent the divine. And that's why the process of ijtihad never ceased, it continued. And there were always at different stages attempts to address those early problems that led to this deviation from the ideal model. That's a very long story, but usually it is very interesting to study some of the works of people like Al-Farabi, people like Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Khaldun, even before that people like Al-Mawardi, although I consider Al-Mawardi to be an apologetic for a despot rather than an actual book on political theory, trying to justify what went wrong rather than trying to provide a good political theory. But nevertheless, through much of the history of Islam, and notwithstanding all the problems that existed with the Ummah, the Islamic political model continued to be superior to other models. If you compare the Umayyads to whatever other dynasties that existed during their time, or if you compare the Abbasids to whatever dynasty that existed during their time, all the way to the Seljukis, to the Ottomans even, until the rise of Europe. Until the Europeans surpassed the Muslims by coming up with a model that seems to some degree deliver what we cease to be able to deliver. And that is the notion of justice. I'm talking here about democracy. Despite all its problems, despite all its failings and all its lackings, or what Norberto Bobbio used to say, the broken promises of democracy, nevertheless we are speaking in comparative terms. In comparative terms, someone like me living in London enjoys a lot more freedom and protection than living in any Muslim country today. And that's because of democracy. Democracy is an important achievement of humanity, a great achievement of humanity. Now, democracy infatuated Muslims as early as the beginnings of the 19th century. Here comes the story of Tahtawi. Tahtawi was a preacher, was an Azhari scholar who was sent by Muhammad Ali, the ruler of Egypt, to accompany a group of cadets to France. But when he went to France, he saw a completely different world. A world that he never thought he could one day see. So he wrote and he decided to study French. He became fluent in French. He studied philosophy, he studied history. He became a great philosopher and decided upon his return to Egypt to write a book to tell the Egyptians about what they were missing. Of course, Tahtawi was seeing with one eye. He didn't see that with the other eye. The French were a colonial power, persecuting the Algerian people and destroying their civilization as well as civilizations of many other nations. But that's the problem of democracy anyway. Western democracy was designed for within rather than without. And that Tahtawi wasn't so much interested in and didn't talk about. But what Tahtawi was interested in is that democracy for the French provided solutions to the many problems that the Muslims have been searching solutions for so many years. Now from Tahtawi onwards, we had all sorts of ideas and theories by Jamaluddin al-Afghani, Muhammad Abdur, Rashid Rida. I'm talking here about the Arab region, probably in other regions as well. There were Muslims thinking along these lines. But the position vis-à-vis democracy and ideas imported from outside kept changing depending on the mood. When Muslims suffered persecution, they tended to isolate themselves. And they tended to think of the other as being a potential danger, even an existential danger. And that's why the worst thing that can happen to any society is oppression. Because under oppression, even your innovative capabilities are reduced. You need freedom to be able to really think and search and come up with new ideas. And this is what led at one stage to theories, I call them theories because they are, I don't accept them anyway, that Islam and democracy were incompatible. That we Muslims have our own ways, have our own system, which is again an erroneous notion actually. We had a model, we had an experience, we had a set of values, but we don't have a working contemporary model to serve justice. Because this is what Islam is about. Islam is about serving justice. And as I told you earlier, Uthman radiallahu anh was assassinated because his assassins accused him of failing to serve justice. This is the issue. But then afterwards came, as a result of transformations around us, and again, political thought is the product not only of ideas, it's also the product of the environment, of experiences, of interactions. The changes we start seeing in Eastern Europe, the fall of the Soviet bloc, all this encouraged the emergence of new thinking. And one of the pioneers in this new thinking was Rashid al-Ghannouchi. And Rashid al-Ghannouchi is a person, probably some of you heard him before, interacted with him. He has a rare quality that you don't usually find in people of his prominent stature, and that is he is humble to tell you what we were and where we've become. What we have learned and where we went wrong. I mean, the Tunisians, and Rashid al-Ghannouchi in particular, are really very good at this. Even the Nahda movement, since I knew it more than a quarter of a century ago, regularly in their conferences produced evaluations or revisions or reviews of where they did well and where they did bad. And he has the quality of being able, if you put a question to him, even though he never thought about it before, to come up with some idea. This is a talent that Allah gives to certain individuals and probably not to many. Rashid al-Ghannouchi, together with some others in that period, we're talking here about from the mid-80s onwards, started laying the foundations for a theory of an Islamic democracy. A system of governance that is inspired by the values of Islam, but that learns from the ways of the democratic world. That we need not invent the wheel. It's already so much there that we can learn from. And there was a time in the 90s where we thought, myself included of course, that democracy was our best bet. That if we stick to it, and if we struggle for it, and if we have the chance to implement it, that will be sufficient to accomplish our objective, establishing an Islamic system that delivers justice to the people. And then came the Arab Spring. And the Arab Spring was the greatest opportunity we had all been waiting for. The people rose, they brought down despots, and asked the Islamists, including the Nahda movement in Tunisia, which was still part of the Muslim Brotherhood until then, to lead the change. They asked the Ikhwan al-Muslimun in Egypt to lead the change. They asked Al-Islah in Yemen, which is also a Muslim Brotherhood organization, to lead the change. Because the Muslim Brotherhood had a history and its figures have a status in society that makes people trust them for something like this. But then, what we did not probably account for or think could happen is for the entire world to come together to destroy this experience. I'm not talking here about the experience of the Islamists, I'm talking here about the revolutions themselves, the process of democratization initiated by the Arab Spring. And the reason, of course, for this is very clear. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and other despots in the region were horrified that if Egypt became a democracy, if Tunisia became a democracy, then Libya, Yemen, Syria, probably then others, then who can save Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Gulf countries from democratization? Their own children, their own young men and women would want the same change to happen in those countries. So they paid billions of dollars in order to see that someone like Sisi topples Mohammed Morsi, the elected president, and then the rest of the story is very well known to you. Today Egypt is in a very bad shape, 60,000 political prisoners held, many thousands killed already, the economy is in dire condition, the whole Arab world is in a mess. Now, what is the relevance of all of this to Rashid Ghannouchi and to Islamic democracy? The relevance is that what happened to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt has terrified most Islamists around the world. And they started rushing one after the other to disown the Muslim Brotherhood, to claim that we belong to the intellectual school, but we are not part of the organization. Because Rashid Ghannouchi and his group in Tunisia were told, they were told bluntly by the Americans and by the Europeans and by some Arabs that if you don't desist, the same thing will happen to you as happened to Mohammed Morsi and his group in Egypt. So here you think, I want to try and save as much as I can. And the process of making concessions and compromises begins. There's nothing wrong with making concessions and compromises. If you cannot climb a mountain, the whole of the mountain, then it's okay. I mean, you climb a little bit and sit there and take a breath of air and think about what to do next. But the danger is to pretend that you are a different person, that we are no longer Islamists, but we are Muslim Democrats. What does it mean? Is a Muslim Democrat something to do with identity? I mean, is a Democrat an identity, or is it a description of a conduct, an attitude? When you say this person is a Democrat, it means this person respects the rules of democracy, the value of democracy. But it's not an identity. I am a Muslim. My identity is a Muslim. I am Palestinian. That's part of my identity. I am Hebronite from Hebron. That's part of my identity. But a Democrat, that's an attitude. There may come a time when, for one reason or another, a staunch supporter of Democrat might become an anti-democrat, might lose faith in democracy. And we've seen examples of this. When you persecute people, when you violate them, when you deny them their basic rights, their mindset changes. Where else does terrorism come from? Terrorism is not something that people conspire in a dark room. Terrorism is a reaction to oppression. What they call terrorism is actually a reaction to oppression. Whether it is Al-Qaeda or it is ISIS or whatever, these are products of most unwholesome conditions. Mohammed bin Salman's foreign minister, Adil Al-Jubair, the other day was in Belgium giving a lecture. And he said that the Muslim Brotherhood is the father of all terrorism. Because out of the Muslim Brotherhood was born Takfir and Hijrah. Then out of Takfir and Hijrah was born Ayman al-Zawahiri. Out of Ayman al-Zawahiri was born Al-Qaeda. Out of Al-Qaeda was born ISIS. And that's why the Muslim Brotherhood is the father of all terrorism. And I say that Saudi Arabia is the father of all terrorism. Because they've been funding despots. They've been funding corrupt rulers here and there. They and the rulers of Abu Dhabi and people like Sisi who are murdering innocent people in Sinai are the producers of terrorism. Just like Tony Blair was the producer of terrorism when he and George W. Bush invaded Iraq. And we warned them before they went to Iraq. I still remember in February 2003, in our 1 million man and woman rally in London, I spoke and said, you claim you want to go and fight terrorism, this war will produce even worse terrorism. And the following day, a British newspaper had a headline making a mockery of me, saying, the doctor has spoken. And actually, I have been vindicated and proven right. ISIS came out of the womb of Al-Qaeda because of Iraq. Had they not invaded Iraq, that would not have happened. And it came out of the womb of toppling democracy in Egypt, of what they did to Syria and what they are doing to Yemen today. The story is not over. They haven't seen anything yet. So long as they kill innocent people, violate their basic rights, more and more reaction will explode in their faces. No, it is a terrifying picture. But would I one day, because of this, claim that I was never a member of the Muslim Brotherhood? That would be my failure if I were to do that. No! There's nothing wrong with being a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. When Dr. Mohammed Morsi became a president in Egypt, a member of the Muslim Brotherhood leading Egypt, the entire world wanted to see Mohammed Morsi and shake his hand. Even the Israelis sent mediators through a European country to ask if Mohammed Morsi would be willing to talk to them. It is not the Muslim Brotherhood that have something wrong with them. It is corruption, it is despotism, and it is cowardice. It is fear. And that's why, in my opinion, political thinkers should not embroil themselves in political processes that are not genuine. Much of democracy in the Muslim world is fake. Don't waste your time. It's fake. I mean, we've tried in Jordan. Our Muslim Brotherhood guys tried in Jordan. We tried in Egypt before the Arab revolutions. We tried in Algeria. We tried in Tunisia. We tried everywhere. These despots want only to use democracy to make themselves look less ugly. Not because they are serious about delivering justice. Look at the parliaments that are across the Muslim world. Are they defending the rights of the populations? Or are they actually mostly representatives of a ruling party that is monopolizing power and not allowing anybody else to compete fairly with it? So democracy is a nice thing, but we need to distinguish between genuine democracy and fake democracy. I would never waste my time over fake democracy. It will even damage my image to do so. And this is what is happening to our brothers in Tunisia today. Okay, you cannot continue with the same enthusiasm because all the factors are against you, tell the public the truth. Tell them that this is what we've been told, that this is the warning that has been given to us, that this is the threat that has been issued against us. And what we believe is that we need another revolution. We need another Arab Spring. Because unless we uproot the despots will not allow you to share anything with them. They want all the money. They want all the power. They want all the prestige. They'll give you nothing unless they think if they give you something that will benefit them in one way or another. But genuine democracy requires a revolution, requires radical change. And I firmly believe that the next round of revolutions is coming, and is coming soon. Because the counter-revolution is causing so much damage to the Muslim world that is even not comparable to the damage that existed before the Arab revolutions. In absence of all of this, or not in absence, in spite of all of this, and on its margins, someone will have to continue to work on the theory. In my book, in my conclusions of the book that you will be able to read in Malay on Saturday, I advise the Nahda movement and Rashid Ghannouchi that Rashid Ghannouchi is a great thinker and he should be spared the battle of politics. That he should be dedicated to thinking for the Muslim Ummah, because we need people like him. But once you become at the forefront of the political battle, your ability to produce new thinking is diminished, and your image will also be distorted, if not tarnished. Alhamdulillah that in Islam we have this concept of ijtihad. Concept of ijtihad means that any Muslim, men or women, young or old, depending on their knowledge and expertise, can think about what the text it means and how it can be applied in a certain context. And I think we need to encourage this ijtihad in the political field in the hope of preparing ourselves better for the next round of revolutions, so that when the people are successful in uprooting these tyrants, we can work for the establishment of systems, of regimes that deliver justice to the populations. Do we have afterwards discussion, or don't we? Do we have discussion afterwards?
Yeah, I think we can continue.
I think to make it more probably beneficial for everyone, I'd like to end here and hear from our sisters and brothers in the audience what they think, and also receive their questions if they have any questions about the things that I have said. Thank you very much.
This evening, the Q&A question will be handled by Dr. Farouk. So, Dr. Farouk, I pass the floor to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Azzam, for your very kind speech. And of course, you had basically managed to share with us the theory of Dr. Islam from the time of the Prophet and the Caliph, the great Caliph, and towards the Ibn Taymiyyah, the Khaldun, and the rest, until Tahtawi and to Ghani and whatever. And it was, to me, in a way that because we have written this particular book that we're going to launch tomorrow, And we are taught so much about this Islamic democracy in that particular book, and the ideas of Rashid Ghanouchi. And you seem to be, to me, very critical of him now. But I guess it's because of that he shunned his Islamist kind of, image to become a Muslim Democrat, and you're not very happy with that, I suppose. Yeah. So I think without further delay, I would like to invite if you have any questions to the Azzam or the event, and introduce yourself and be specific with questions and be brief. Thank you so much. Anyone? Sure? Yeah, you can use this. You can use this. That's fine.
Thank you, Brother Azzam. Brother Farouk. We were talking about the theory. Then the earlier part of this thinking had been organized by, I think, to comment on the Abu Yusuf, Iqbal Kharaj, and then of course Al-Qaeda. I remember you advised not to read Mardi, because it is a religion, as you said. Religion, okay. I hope you advised not to read fully Sultannya by Al-Marwani, because it's a very to justify the corrupt system of the Oman Empire. Then I believe we should give a comment on the work of Aududi, Assad, and the principle of government, and the earlier work of Sheikh Ali Abdul Razak. Because when we, after the hindsight, when we read the book of Sheikh Ali Abdul Razak, it gives substance. It provides substance to the thinking of the political Islam. Then, as early as 1920, Sheikh Abdul Razak have commented that in Islam, the history of Islam is deeply rich with knowledge, fiqh, usul, maqasid, tafsir, hadith, ulul-hadith, but it's very poor in social science and political science. He was given an opportunity PhD in Azzam to go to Oxford to have a short course 1 year on political science. So his comment was, I said, quite reasonable, because people accuse him as the first secularist, providing secularism as a basis of justification for this. So no need to revive, to reinstate the Khilafah. They must buy Ahmad. You follow my argument? I'm giving that naturally, historically, we are poor in understanding politics. Because to have this in South Africa is wanted, the despotic rulers, they encourage you, but as you see, the development of Ummah is among the ulama. The freedom of speech is very rich in the of Abu Hanifah, Malik, Anas, Shafi, and Ahmad. But there's no many ulama during that time very enough to bring on each other, to give muhasabah to the corrupt system of the Khalif. So can you comment on this? Whether there's some relevance in the thinking of Ali Shia now, because people are saying about there's insecularism, you clear a lot. There is no secularism especially in the West, it's understood in the West, which I can say there's no, the state is neutral in matters regarding religion. It's what the meaning of secularism in the modern world. It's not an authority, a state or ruler to prevent people from having religion and so on. It's more the governance of the state is neutral. It's not quite in matters.
Thank you, Sheikh Abdullah. Can we have the second question, please? Anyone? There's no one yet, then you can answer this.
Well, regarding the first point, I think regarding Ali Abdul Razak and his book, now we know that his book was a political device rather than a work of intellectual argument. When in 1924 Ataturk announced the official death of the Caliphate, some people in Egypt thought of declaring the government in Egypt, the Khidewi, to be the next Caliph. So if the Ottomans didn't want, or if the Turks didn't want the Caliphate, then the Egyptians could have it. But there were people who were opposed to this idea, and they were the ones who incited Ali Abdul Razak to write his book, in which he seeks to prove that there is no such thing as an Islamic state, and that the Prophet ﷺ did not establish an Islamic state, which any reader of Sirah will easily come to refute. It's not true. The Prophet ﷺ was a divinely inspired prophet, but he was also a leader of a community. And soon after his death, the Muslim community gathered together to elect or appoint a successor, because they felt that this community needed to be governed, to be administered, and to remain united. And you couldn't do this without a political order of some sort. But it is actually the context in which Ali Abdul Razak authored his book that is more important. He had already been influenced by his own mentor at Oxford University into thinking what he thought, but someone in Egypt felt that was the time when such thinking needed to be used for political ends. Now, when we assess writings and ideas across the Muslim world, the context of each is very important. Take Mawardi, for instance. Mawardi is one of the most read books among Muslims. And it is usually read as a book that provides a political theory or a theory of governance. But actually the reason why Mawardi wrote his book is very similar to the reasons Ali Abdul Razak wrote his book. The Abbasid Caliph during Mawardi was in danger of being swept away by the Buwayhids, a Shiite rising group near Baghdad, who had been growing in influence. So Mawardi wrote a book in which he sought to convince the public that this caliph was the only legitimate ruler, and that he should not be toppled, and that although this system of governance was hereditary, and it was not like the system that existed during the rightly guided caliphate, since it existed and was endorsed by the scholars of each time, then it is legitimate. This is the argument that really Mawardi puts forward, and he cites all sorts of examples that contradict absolute Islamic values in order to show that under certain circumstances it's okay if this is done, especially when it comes to hereditary kingships. When we study Ibn Taymiyyah, for instance, when we study Ibn Khaldun, when we study even contemporary thinkers, whether in the Sunni world or in the Shia world, the context of each literary work is as important as the work itself, if not more, because it gives us an indication as to what wrote this to be. Take the works of Sayyid Qutb, for instance. Unless you know the context in which Sayyid Qutb wrote every one of his books, we will do a great injustice to the man, as many people do nowadays. I think what is needed today is to go back to the core values that Islam or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to uphold and implement in our lives. That's why I quoted the verses that talk about justice and ihsan. These are the two most important values when it comes to relations among humans, whether in a Muslim society or in a human society as a whole. And at the same time, we need to look for means and methods of turning these values into practice. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the practice was the practice of the Arabs. Rasulullah ﷺ did not invent a new practice. For instance, Shura. Shura had already been in existence among the Arabs. And the Arabs practiced Shura in a specific way that continued to be practiced by the Prophet and his companions after him until it was no longer possible for Shura to be practiced in that way. And that's when Shura was killed or was put on the shelf. That's why Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah, was the one who is quoted famously as saying that it was Muawiyah who killed Shura. Shura is a value that is mentioned in the Quran twice. وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ and وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ. Shura means consultation, means counsel, means involving the public in decision making. That's what it means. But how do you involve the public in decision making? The Arabs, who were composed of tribes, were content with having the heads of the clans meet in a special place called Dar al-Nadwa, in which they discussed matters among themselves because they were recognized by their various clans as their representatives. Now this, 50 years later, didn't work anymore. The Arabs were gone. The majority of the Muslims were not Arabs anyway. They were Persians, they were Byzantines, they were Chinese, they were Africans. People came from different cultures, they had different habits, they had different attitudes. And the challenge was to rethink the methodology. But because the Muslims were so much engaged either in conquests or in fighting each other, they had very little time for this. And also, the rise of despotism prevented it because despots didn't want to see a change, didn't want to see themselves lose the power they managed to gather in their own hands. And of course, with power comes wealth. I think in our history, the first real awakening happened during the time of Ibn Taymiyyah. Because when Ibn Taymiyyah was in Harran and then moved to Damascus, that was the time the Mongols or the Mongols invaded the region. And with the invasion of the Mongols, the entire Muslim civilization was wiped out. The Caliph ceased to exist. Whatever remained of a decaying political order ceased to exist. And that's why, interestingly enough, unlike all his predecessors, Ibn Taymiyyah did not write about the existence of a political order. He wrote about the absence of a political order. So he wanted the Muslims to face up to the challenge of creating a new political order. Not on the basis of former examples as Mawardi did in his book, but on the basis of the verses that talk about justice and ihsan. So you see, this is an issue that we really need to grasp when in the modern times we look for the establishment of a political order that is capable of delivering justice.
Okay, can we have the second question? Yes, can you introduce yourself first?
Hello. Good day, doctor. I'm Daniel. I have one question for you. What is your opinion about Ayatollah Khomeini system of wilayah party. Could you elaborate more about that? Is it compatible with our discussions?
Thank you. Can I have second one, please? Yeah, Brother.
Dr. Azzam, I have just one question, which is more current and contemporary. This is in relation to the situation in Turkey. When the AKP came into power, headed by President Erdogan, I think we have to accept the fact that when he came in, he did a lot of good things, especially on the economic aspects of life in Turkey. He has moved Turkey up the economic ladder very, very much. And initially, everybody welcomed him. But over the years, I don't know what got into him. He became more, what shall I say, insecure, to the point where he began to suspect everybody seems to be against him. So it's a bit tragic, in my point of view, that a good person like him, he has managed the country so well, but now it has come to a situation where he is not getting the support from the global powers. And with the geopolitics in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, he's getting into a very big mess. So, what do you think of this Turkey situation? Are they going to be or survive in the next 10, 15 years? Or somebody will then make him diminish in the near future? That's my question.
Thank you. Can we have a third one?
Assalamualaikum. I'm Ilman from RIUM. I have 3 questions. The first 2 questions is a counter arguments from scholars with regards to democracy and democratization of the Middle East. So the first question is with regards to scholars who give legal ruling or fatwa discouraging people from participating in revolution and coining the event in Syria as a failed revolution which caused more harm than benefits to the people due to attempt of toppling down the despot. Second is there are also scholars who simply assert that democracy is simply incompatible with the Muslims in the Arabs. They are more compatible to be ruled by a strong man, which is a monarchical system. So, as a political scientist, how do you respond to this? And the third question is, I forgot the third question. Just 2 for now. Thank you.
First of all, regarding Khomeini and Wilayat al-Faqih, Shiites, of course, Shiites are different groups. We are talking here about the Ithna Ashriya, the 12ers. They are called the 12ers, who believe that the Prophet ﷺ is succeeded by 12 imams, who are divine in some sense, infallible, and they, like the Prophet, could receive divine inspiration or revelation. Now, this group, the 12ers, for more than 1,000 years, insisted not to be involved in politics until the coming of the Messiah, the Mahdi. They believe that the 12th Imam is a Messiah who disappeared into a cave when he was a very young child, and they stayed for more than 1,000 years waiting for him to come out, and he has not yet come out. I don't think he'll ever come out. So when the revolution happened in Iran, and the revolution was participated in by Shiite scholars like Khomeini, many others. They had to come up with a justification for becoming the rulers of the country, because they've been telling people for hundreds of years that they had to wait for the Messiah. This is very similar to Orthodox Jews. Orthodox Jews also believed that the return to Palestine was haram, was forbidden, and that until their own Messiah came and took them back, it was a major sin. It was a sin for them to go back to Palestine, and that's why they opposed Zionism, many of them, until they became a small minority with the passage of time. So Wilayatul Faqih is a theory that used to be applied in the old times to social matters. And Khomeini developed it and applied it to the political system as well, and appointed himself as a deputy of the Mahdi, as deputizing for the Mahdi until the Mahdi comes. And that's why Khomeini, and after him Khamenei, enjoy a prestigious position that they cannot be argued. Whatever they say has to be taken as a divine ruling. Of course, for me as a Muslim, I consider this entire theory, whether the waiting for the Mahdi until he comes out of the cave, or the trick of devising the deputy of the Mahdi until he comes, to be unacceptable. It's unacceptable on the basis of the doctrine. It's unacceptable on the basis of rationale. But anyway, they managed to establish a state, not because of this theory, but with its help. With regard to Turkey, it might be a little bit early to judge Erdogan and his system of government, his attitude. And simply because we are not talking about a country that is running its affairs comfortably, to say the least. Turkey, like many other countries in the region, did not expect the Arab Spring. And before the Arab Spring, they were doing very well, and they were extending relations with various countries in the world, Muslim and non-Muslim equally. They were doing very well in trade. And then suddenly the Arab world explodes. And they decide to stand by the masses. And for that, some people wanted to make them pay the price. A very heavy price. And part of that heavy price was the attempted coup on the 15th of July 2016. And that was a very serious attempt. Hundreds of people lost their lives. Now we know that the United Arab Emirates was involved together with some local groups. Apparently some people in the United States of America, high in office, knew about it and probably celebrated prematurely what they thought was the success of the coup. I think we have to expect that in such circumstances, the ruler and the ruling elite becomes nervous and become tense. I'm not trying to defend Erdogan and anybody else, but I'm trying to shed light on the challenges and the difficulties they are facing. The revival of the Kurdish problem after they thought they resolved it. That's another major challenge, to the extent that they decided to go into war into Syria. It's not a very good thing to do, but sometimes it's forced on you. I hear when I go to Turkey criticism from Turkish friends that Erdogan is probably becoming a dictator, that probably he is doing this, he's doing that. Luckily, Turkey is still a democracy. And it's the responsibility of the Turkish people. And if the Turkish people are unhappy with him, they should exercise their right and replace him. and choose another political party. I am not familiar of any measures, probably there are, but I'm not familiar with them, that Erdogan has taken or could have taken in order to curtail the democratic process in the future. I'm not aware of that. I haven't heard criticism in this regard. He is usually criticized in the West by certain circles that we know are not so friendly toward Islam as a whole. Although Erdogan and his group come out of the system which was created by Atatürk initially, in the West they insist on branding them as Islamists, even associating them with the Muslim Brotherhood as a label. But if democracy is maintained and if it is not undermined to deny the Turkish people the right to choose, I have little to worry about. Because the system of checks and balances, media, various accountability instruments should prevent the situation from getting out of hand. But is Turkey tense? Yes, it is tense, of course. When you have suddenly 3 million Syrian refugees, when suddenly you have all sorts of groups trying to terrorize your own nation and turn certain communities against you, when the United States of America, a major partner in NATO, is arming your own enemies, a certain faction of the PKK in Syria. It's not an easy situation. Definitely it's not an easy situation. Now regarding the scholars or what I referred to, throughout the history of Islam, there have always been two types of scholars. What we call ulama al-sultan, the sultan's scholars. They are ready there just to issue the fatwa he wants. And these are like the medieval European church. Exactly. These scholars who either studied Islam in specialized colleges or universities, or who pose in a certain appearance, in my opinion, do not represent Islam or the Muslims. And we know them from what they say. I mean, look at Saudi Arabia today. 7 months ago, more than a dozen things were haram. Today they are all halal. Just because Muhammad bin Salman wanted them to be halal. Suddenly music is halal, dancing is halal, mixing is halal, women driving cars is halal, women attending football games is halal, cinemas are halal. Very soon nightclubs will be halal. Very soon Saudis won't need to go to Bahrain because they will provide them with everything they want, because these things will become suddenly halal. I mean, the ulama who give these fatwas are definitely not working for Allah. They work for Muhammad bin Salman. Now, those who claim that the revolutions were bad and etc. are actually working for the despots, because the revolutions were peaceful in the beginning. All the people wanted was for dignity to be recognized, for their rights to be respected. What do the people do when Assad sends his tanks and his airplanes and starts bombing them? When his soldiers start raping their women, what do people do in this case? So these scholars, if they were really decent and honest, they should be condemning the tyrants rather than the victims of tyranny. The same thing about democracy. When they say democracy does not suit the Muslims or the Arabs, well, does it suit the Muslims and the Arabs a despot like Sisi? Why can't we have democracy? Why, when the people of Egypt elected Muhammad Mursi out of free will, the army was mobilized with the billions of dollars paid by the UAE and Saudi Arabia in order to destroy that democratic process? For one reason they did this. Because if democracy was to be given time in Egypt, it would have definitely succeeded. And an Islamic model of democracy would have been a unique model that probably will prove much better than some of the liberal Western democracies. But they don't even want to allow that experiment to succeed. The despots in the Arab world and Iran felt threatened by the success of a Sunni democracy. And that's why Iran is in Syria today, destroying Syria together with Russia. And that's why Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates conspired against democracy in Egypt, in Libya, in Yemen, and elsewhere in the region. What is democracy? Let's ask these scholars, what do they understand by democracy? They probably tell you democracy is kufr, that's it. That's all they know. Kufr in what way? How was Abu Bakr chosen caliph? If you compare the manner in which he was elected or the manner in which Umar was elected, purely democratic in the sense that the people made a free choice. Today's democracy, if we talk about the model of liberal democracy, consists of two components. An ideological component and a procedural component. We may have issue with the ideological component, and we are not under any obligation to adopt the ideological component that believes in liberalism and aspects of modernity that severs all ties with religion. We don't have to do this. In the West, they needed to do this because their experience with religion was a very negative experience. In our case, it's not like that. Now, the procedural aspect of democracy is about elections, is about the rule of law, is about equality before the law, is about basic human rights, is about minority rights, it's about checks and balances, and all of these are 100% compatible with Islam and with common sense.
Thank you, Sheikh. Can we have the third round, please? Yep. Jason?
Okay, I do apologize if this question is offensive, but I'm curious about the Morsi's, when just before Sisi took over, Morsi did he gave himself immunity powers right at the end. There was a point where there was immunity for all his actions. Why did he do this? Why was this done? Because it seems so incompatible with the whole purpose that brought him into power. Because it was very, it seemed very against character. So if you could enlighten us.
Next one, please. Yeah, please. Introduce yourself. Yes, please.
Assalamualaikum, Dr. Azzam. My name is Zamani Zakaria. My questions, there are a few parts of my question. Firstly, I'd like to get your view in terms of the establishment of the Islamic State or the Islamic order for humanity. Because we Muslims believe that Islam has come for humanity actually, not for just Muslims. It's for the world. So the Muslims need to do their job to invite all others to Islam. And maybe for so long a time, invitation to Islam, to do the non-Muslims have not been given priority by the Muslims themselves? Perhaps at one time the Muslims were fighting with each other. Perhaps at another time there was so much misunderstanding about the Islamic agenda such that those who are against the Islamic agenda rose to fight against the Muslims, not understanding actually what the Islamic message should be. See, what I notice is that every time when there is a rise of a Muslim movement or a process towards establishment of government, it is quickly and with intent being destroyed by certain parties among the Muslims and also certain parties outside. For example, Algeria, when FIS actually won in the elections, but soon after that we saw a lot of things happening, unexplainable things happening, such that the military came in and FIS was destroyed. We saw in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, or last time it was East Pakistan and West Pakistan, the feeling towards Jamati Islamic. Yeah. And then we saw in the uprising, the Arab Spring. Yeah. When the uprising was happening in Egypt, apparently the West was very interested to see the uprising, or supposedly interested to see the uprising successful. They want Hosni Mubarak to be removed, you know. And to the extent that when the Egyptian authorities start to ban or restrict YouTube and Yahoo and whatever other things, the West helped to do mirroring of the sites so that the Egyptian population can still continue on the social media. And then Morsi won. Ikhwan Muslimin won. Yeah? They tried to set up a government. But then we saw the West was uncomfortable and they would like that government under Muslim Brotherhood to be destroyed. So what I'm trying to say is this. Why are we going through all this process over and over again? And it appears to be making Islam as a misunderstood religion. Even the book by the brother said Qutub wrote Islam as a misunderstood religion. So I think the answer lies a lot in the Muslims actually going out to promote Islam, to propagate Islam, to invite people to Islam, and to show good examples. Because at the moment, it's not easy to use the Muslim population as a good example for many things. You know? There was an Arab TV channel that showed, even in Japan, how the people were much more organized and much more disciplined as compared to the people in the Muslim countries. Even one scholar, I think, I forgot his name, he said that in France, he saw Islam in France, but he didn't see Islam in the Muslim countries. So, can you elaborate on this? Thank you.
Thank you. I guess to answer your question, I don't know, maybe you have some of the answers to that. Can we have one last one, please? I mean, for this round. Do you have anyone? Yep, anyone?
I can ask Prof to explain a bit further to us the difference between Muslim Democrat and Islamist. Is just a matter of naming or there is some substance there? Thank you.
Again, thank you.
Regarding the question about Muhammad Morsi, it's not exactly that what happened. It's, so much was happening every day, every hour in Egypt at the time. But when Brother Muhammad Morsi issued that order or presidential decree, he needed to guarantee that the army and the constitutional court, which was under the control of the army, stopped repealing his orders. Because every time he said something, they went to the constitutional court, and the constitutional court nullified his order. And the reason he needed to do this is that the army had dissolved parliament. So there was no parliament. An elected parliament was dissolved. That 1 year during which Dr. Morsi ruled before he was removed, in my opinion, is still highly undocumented. Because many of the people involved have either been killed or are in prison. There are a few in the diaspora, but they don't have the full story. But imagine if you are an elected president, and then whenever you want to do something, an unelected body empowered by the army impedes you and prevents you from doing anything. He needed, prior to the election of the parliament, which was supposed to happen soon afterwards, had the coup not taken place, he wanted to get certain things done, and that's the way he felt he needed to do it. And unfortunately, he came under unfair attack by his opponents, and they tried to say things about it. And many of the people, by the way, who criticized them for this, supported the coup afterwards. And how can you be so sensitive about what a democratically elected president does, and then you go and support the army to crush the democratic experience altogether? The comment, the brother, the long comment about Muslims, and well, some of what you said I agree with, but I don't agree that the West supported the Arab revolutions. No, the West was taken by surprise, and the West thought this was a reality it could not prevent from happening. So to a large extent they stayed away. But it was the despots in the Arab world, especially in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, who started preparing for the counter-revolution and who sent delegation after delegation to Washington, to London, and to Paris, probably to other capitals, to tell them that if we allow Morsi to rule, and if we allow the Muslim Brotherhood to rule, this would be most detrimental to your interests and to our interests. But it wasn't really the West that stood by the Arab revolutions, as you explained. And I agree with you, of course, that Islam did not come for a certain community. I mean, how come that you Malays are Muslims today? How come we have Persian Muslims, we have Chinese Muslims, we have Japanese Muslims, we have American Muslims, European Muslims? Islam is a universal religion. The Arabs were not Muslim when Islam came. Islam started with one man, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he was joined by his wife, Khadija, then by his cousin, Ali, and then by his friend, Abu Bakr. And then it started expanding. Are the Muslims not doing enough to portray Islam in a positive way? Definitely. There are even many Muslims who have no job other than giving Islam a bad image. And that's really regrettable. And we find this everywhere, and especially where there are non-Muslim communities, and these non-Muslim communities are exposed to very bad practices by Muslims. And as a result, they are deterred and they are driven away from Islam. Actually, da'wah throughout the history of Islam was successful not verbally, was successful because of an example. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about His Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرِ. You have an example in the life of the Prophet for those who seek Allah and the last day. It's a model, it's an example where there is mercy, compassion, adl, ihsan. These are the ways that Muslims should be living among themselves and with others as well. Because Islam is about humanity, it's not about a certain race or a certain ethnic affiliation. Now, what's the difference between a Muslim Democrat and an Islamist? When I wrote my book, and the publisher, Oxford University Press, wanted to publish it, we started thinking about the title. What title to give the book? You know, publishers want catchy titles, marketable titles. The original title of my thesis, because this was my PhD thesis, was Transitional Problems to Democratization in the Middle East. Not a very nice title for a book. Because I took Rashid Ghannouchi as a study case, actually my thesis was not originally about Rashid Ghannouchi. It was about what prevents democratization from taking place in the Middle East. But I took Nahda and Rashid Ghannouchi as a study case. So I came up with this title, Rashid Ghannouchi, a Democrat within Islamism. So as if Islamism is not democratic, and Rashid Ghannouchi is this very special, unique individual. He was actually the head of the political department in the Muslim Brotherhood. So he was a pure Islamist. So I was describing an Islamist, Rashid Ghannouchi, as a Democrat. Because I myself was a Democrat. I considered myself a Democrat. I don't see a contradiction between being an Islamist and a Democrat. Although I don't like the term Islamist. Never liked it. Because this is a term that was coined by opponents of the Muslim Brotherhood to give an impression that it is something negative, that is different from being a Muslim. No, we are Muslims, we are just ordinary Muslims, but we believe that we have something to offer to humanity. We have an understanding of Islam that we believe is the middle way Islam. We don't want to be called anything, but if people call you a name, and then this name becomes so popular, that to the extent that you start using it yourself to call yourself, that's the dilemma. And that's why there shouldn't be two groups. A group calling itself Muslim Democrats and a group calling itself Islamists. There's no such thing. We are Muslims, forget about all names. We are Muslims. We either believe in democracy or we don't. Even if you don't believe in democracy, you are still a Muslim. There's nothing wrong with not believing in democracy, apart from probably causing us some problems. But it's up to you if you don't want to believe in democracy. It's a free house, it's a free world. What we need to do, rather than branding each other and calling each other names, is encourage debate. Let's encourage each other to discuss things. Whether you like me or not, whether I like you or not, let's sit together and see where we disagree. Perhaps out of this discussion, something very good can emerge.
Thank you, Brother. Now probably because we're having the Zulkifli Ahmad as well with Sheikh because it seems that there's a shift in the political milieu of our society, that the Islamists now tend to become Democrats, Muslim Democrats. It was after Ghannouchi made an announcement that we are no more Islamists, we are Muslim Democrats. So what is your take on that?
Well, I was in Tunis when that announcement was made, and I was very angry, and I wrote articles about it, and they didn't like it. I can understand that our brothers in Tunisia are under considerable pressure. I understand that. And I understand and I know that they were threatened. But that is not justification for shedding your skin, for pretending to be someone else. It doesn't work. And trust me, nobody believes them. nobody believes in. They come up with this very weird idea of separating the da'wi from the siyasi, the missionary from the political. And they said that now, since Tunisia is in a new era of democracy, we don't need to be involved in da'wah. That we are a political party and we should involve ourselves only in politics. You are actually doing the bidding of the secularists by saying this. This is the argument of the secularists, which Rashid Ghannouchi fought against for no less than 30 years. He even wrote a book about this. Because we don't believe as Muslims that there is such a separation between the political and the religious. There is a division of labor. Yes, I know that certain individuals, if it were up to me, are not fit to be members of parliament. But that's because of them as individuals. Not because of a certain idea or because of Islam. Because we have different capacities. I mean, someone who is unable to make compromises cannot enter a political process because the political process is about compromises. I mean, someone like me, I'm not fit to be a member of parliament because I'll fight everybody. It doesn't work. So I'd rather stay out, fight them in my open space. But if you, and this is the problem, I have actually a very interesting paper on this, and I think it's online. I presented it when I was a visiting professor at Kyoto University in Japan, about the Jordanian experience with this, because we had this experience in Jordan. When our brothers entered the political process in 1989, when we had the first ever and last free elections, they needed people who were popular in the community. Who are the popular ones in the community? The khutaba, khatibs. The people who give the Friday sermon. They are very popular. But are they good politicians? Not necessarily. Probably some of them would, but not necessarily. So it's not a qualification. Being popular because you give the khutbah every Friday and because people like what you say, especially if you are a fiery speaker, that doesn't mean that when you are in parliament you will do a very good job, or when you are a minister you will do a very good job. So we need to learn from that lesson. But of course power has a sweet taste. When people become MPs and end up having some privileges, they want to keep that. And that results afterwards in internal feud within the movement. But it is a fact that we have to have a division of labor. But to say that I, Rashid Ghannouchi, will no longer talk about da'wah, I consider this to be a grave mistake. Why? Why are you denying yourself your basic right? You have the right to say to what is wrong, wrong, and to what is good. You have the right to say to people, fear God. You have the right to, if you go to a mosque on Friday and people love you and appreciate you and they invite you to give a khutbah, go and give a khutbah. But to say, I am either in politics or in da'wah, I think that was a very dangerous approach, and it came under pressure from their coalition members in Tunisia. That if you want to stay in power, you have to do this. I would have rather preferred that they left politics altogether rather than come to this sort of conclusion. So this is where it comes from. So what do we call you now that you are no longer involved in this? And what call me Muslim Democrat? Okay, drop Democrats. Just call me a Muslim. Just call me a Muslim. I don't want to be anything else. Tell me, what does Allah expect from you as a Muslim? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتُ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. What Allah is saying to us? Believing men and believing women are partners together in this process in which they order that which is good and forbid that which is bad. What does it mean? It means politics. It means criticizing the regime, criticizing politicians. It means asking for reform. It means asking for democracy, genuine democracy. It means defending human rights. And if you are defending human rights, you will anger the tyrants. And if you anger the tyrants, you may end up in prison. You may even end up being hanged. Is that the end of the story? No, it's not the end of the story. Because the Prophet ﷺ told us, سيد الشهداء حمزة ورجل قام إلى سلطان جائر فأمره ونهاه فقتله. The master of martyrs is Hamza, and a person or a man, and a man here means can be man or woman, and a person or an individual who stands up to a tyrant, tells the tyrant you are wrong, and as a result the tyrant kills him. Martyrdom, a great value in Islam, because you die for a noble idea. Dying for a noble idea, dying in defense of freedom and dignity is a great thing in Islam. It's not the end of the story. You end up being in the companion of the prophets. I mean, look at all these cowards in the Muslim world who want to be in the company of tyrants. These tyrants will go to hell. Do you want to go with them to hell? These tyrants embezzle the wealth of the nation. They're building skyscrapers with the money of the wealth of the nation. They're giving Trump billions of dollars to kill the Muslims in Syria and Iraq. They're buying a painting for Jesus Christ, which is doubtful whether it is a genuine one or not, and they paid $500 million for it. These are tyrants. They are going to hell, unless of course they repent. I don't mind if they repent. I hope they repent. I ask Allah that they repent. It would be good for us if they repent. But if they don't repent and you stay in their company, you go to hell, you might as well stay in the company of those who seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Thank you. Unless there's one last burning question, I'm going to close the session. Badana? Yeah, please.
Forgive me if what I say might be offensive to some, but from my own observation about these Muslim nations on earth, if you look from the west of Africa right all the way to Malaysia, Indonesia, and you look at the social and economic indicators, the Muslim nations are at the very bottom. Infant mortality rate, literacy rate, GDP, everything seems to be at the bottom. You compare with the developed nation in Western Europe or America or Canada, there's no way that the Muslim can catch up. My regret or my sadness is this. While we may seem to be talking about the great history of Islam, that we are almost like the chosen people, you can be successful, but we don't seem to be giving the right emphasis, right focus, right support to tackle the issue of economic and social justice. Anyone, if you talk to about religion, they would agree that God is the Almighty. He is the one who will determine your future, your fate. But the thing is, if you do not tackle their bread and butter issue, you cannot put food on the table, that is meaningless to them. I believe that any Islamic or Muslim government, you must tackle these economic and social issues. The food, the bread and butter issues. There's no point fighting for something and you are hungry, your children are not feeding. So my contention is, whatever you aspire to be on the reality. Get your feet closer to the ground and see where we have gone wrong. I think God has given us all the wealth in the world. We've got oil, we've got minerals. In fact, some of all the Muslim countries have got a lot more PhDs compared to some Western European nations. So my request here is that, can we be a bit more pragmatic in the approach? Real issues, the bread and butter issues, for the majority of the Muslim population. Okay, that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Azzam.
When? What's the solution then? You tell me. We've been talking all the while about our aspiration for good governance. I believe good governance is the solution. Why do we have poverty? Why do we have poverty in a country like Saudi Arabia? Why? Why there are so many people who are homeless in Saudi Arabia? When Saudi Arabia is sitting on the largest oil reserve in the world. Why? Because there is no accountability. Because the ruler behaves like God. He cannot be asked questions. He cannot be called to account. Why our Muslim leaders are the worst thieves in the world? Everywhere. We go across the Muslim world. They're all thieves. How come that someone comes to power in a country like Libya or Yemen, penniless, and then ends up getting out of power with a wealth of $40 billion? Where did it come all from? I agree with you, we have these problems, but we have these problems not because we are Muslims. We have these problems because we don't have good governance. We need to struggle to have that good governance. And this is where talking about Islamic political thought, what sort of political theory we need, whatever, etc. The Arab revolutions, to some people were ignited by poverty, to some people were ignited by the sense of humiliation suffered under these dictatorships. Morsi, a few months into his presidency, made a slogan, and I believe that he was removed because of that slogan, at least partly. He said, "We will never stand on our feet until we manufacture our food, we manufacture our medicines, and we manufacture our weapons." These are three things that we have to work on. Because once you do this, you will not need to bow yourself to anybody. You have your food, you have your medications, and you have your weapons to defend yourself. Why did they topple him? Why didn't they give him a chance to fail naturally if they knew he was going to fail? They knew he was going to succeed. That's why they intervened. Only months into his presidency, he resolved the bread problem in Egypt. For the first time in Egyptian history, he resolved the problem of the bread. He ended the stealing of petrol from petrol stations. That was a major conspiracy hatched by influential figures within the army and the political elite. He was on his way to resolving all of this because he was elected by the people and he felt accountable to the people. And this is what we want. And when that happens, hopefully that will be the end of all our miseries.
Thank you very much. I think we have one last question. Yeah, okay. And be quick, right?
Very quick one. Honorable Speaker, and B, I realize that you focus a lot on the Western model of democracy as a means to good governance. I agree with that. But then can you please circumvent that Western model, alright? Probably with a sort of a draw a barrel from the Holy Quran to the ultimate end of the good governance. Thank you.
I think he means that machine gun. If I understood your question correctly, you mean to say, where do we proceed from the initial position of learning from the Western model of democracy? The Western model of democracy has proven to have major deficiencies. The most obvious one is that this liberal model of democracy was designed in-house, not worldwide. And that's why the most brutal colonial powers in the world were the oldest democracies in the world. Britain, France, and the United States of America. Because they believe that whatever progress they achieved was achieved for their own community. And they would share aspects of it with the rest of the world on the basis of an exchange of interests only. And that's why you find Theresa May, who is an elected Prime Minister in Britain, receiving one of the most brutal dictators in the world, giving him a red carpet reception. What is the justification for this? Yeah, Mohammed bin Salman. I mean, Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi Crown Prince, who yesterday was in London. She was asked in Parliament about his record of human rights and what she would say about this, his attitude, his government's attitude. And all she had to say is that this is a country we have strong relations with and very important interests. They want to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia so that Saudi Arabia will use those weapons to kill our brothers and sisters in Yemen. All they care about is for their factories to continue working. This aspect of democracy, which is so selfish and doesn't care about other human communities elsewhere in the world, is the one that we need to do something about, definitely. And that's why I believe on the basis of the values of Islam, which are universal values, whereby as a Muslim, I am expected to do justice to every human being, irrespective of their ethnicity, of their race, of their religion, of their geographic allocation, that we can develop an Islamic system of governance that benefits from the procedural aspects of democracy, whereby we can guarantee that the ruler is elected and accountable, but at the same time, the values of universality, the values of Islam inform us when it comes to practicing that aspect of procedural democracy. So this is the sort of thing that I'm looking forward to.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for attending the talk tonight. Tomorrow, inshallah, we'll have the book launch and the forum as well. Can Islamists be Democrats? I don't know whether Prof will like the topic or not. It's debatable for when I hope that the panelists will do justice as well, and we can have a good debate on the topic, inshallah. With that, I would like to thank you everyone, and inshallah I'll see you again tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum.